Welcome to episode 26 of the FoodGrads podcast, the podcast where we explore careers in the food, beverage, and hospitality industries. I'm your host, Veronica Hislop, a molecular science graduate student and career partner with FoodGrads. This week on the podcast, I interview Jennifer Shrubsole. Jennifer is a dietitian-nutritionist who has worked with clients at hospitals from the greater Vancouver area and Calgary. Her extensive experience in dealing with patients with gastric or pancreatic cancer, irritable bowel syndrome, and inflammatory bowel disease. Jennifer also writes for NaturallyNu, her personal blog where she shares healthy recipes and stories about gluten-free living. In 2015, Jennifer was diagnosed with celiac disease, a hereditary autoimmune condition where your small bowel is damaged by gluten. On the blog, she shares her love for eating whole foods, mostly plant-based, and world travels. In this episode, Jennifer and I talked about what she does as a hospital dietitian and what inspired her to become one. We spent some time talking about different medical conditions and why what you eat in a hospital is so important. Jennifer also talked to me about her food philosophy and signs to know if your diet is working for you. As well, what she's up to on NaturallyNu and the community that she has built there. I really like this episode because Jennifer reminded me how important it is to consider what you put in your body. I know it sounds like something silly to say, but when life gets really busy, you sometimes will just default to the quickest and not always the best options for you. Food is energy, and you should be treating your body in the best way that you can. You can tell that Jennifer is really passionate about what she does, and that really comes through in this episode. So, enough with that introduction, let's get on to the show. Thank you, Jen, for coming on the show. I am excited to learn more about your role. Your role is really crucial, I find, for so many people and individuals. So I'm interested to dive in and learn more about what you do.
Great. Thanks for having me. It's fun to be here.
I guess we should just dive into what you do. So you are a dietitian, but more specifically, you're someone who works at a hospital. And like I just said, I think that's such an important role. And I'd love to get to know a little bit more as a dietitian who specializes in that area. What are some of the daily things that you do? And maybe you could talk more about what you generally do.
Yeah, so there's different areas that dietitians can work, and a hospital setting is definitely one of them. I can't say always talk about specifics, but generally what we'll do is look at what nutrition problems are happening. So it's a different environment for people because it's not about, you're not nourishing someone when they're well. You're trying to nourish someone when they're not feeling well. And that could be they have a medical condition like Crohn's where they're in a flare, or pancreatitis, or they've had a surgery that impacts their digestive tract. So you kind of look at the reason that they came in. You'll look at all their medical and surgical history, anything that might have nutritional implications. You also kind of look at other things like just how are they even tolerating food? How nourished were they coming in? I've seen surgery patients for a particular surgery where they've lost 20 pounds before they've even come into hospital. So you're looking kind of at their nutritional status, what it was like prior to coming in as well. And so you look at that whole picture and you're trying to determine what's the priority as well too, because often people don't have one nutrition problem. They don't have one thing going wrong. They'll have multiple things. And so you try to figure out, well, what's the priority? What can I do nutrition-wise to make that better? And, how can I best nourish them while they're in hospital? And that might be whether it's feeding them through food, whether it's like through a feeding tube or even through an IV. So there's different forms out of nutrition that you can give as well. And then often too, when they're closer to go home, we'll kind of talk about what foods to optimize that and how they can eat at home. So it's kind of like a big generality of what I do. So I'll mainly see like medical and surgical patients, and my role really involves the GI tract. So that involves possible nutritional deficiencies, things that, impact how you heal from a surgery, how well you recover from something. And we'll try to just keep you as nourished as possible. That was a very roundabout answer there. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I was just thinking about for people who are admitted to the hospital, as you're mentioning that you were helping to form and figure out what these diets are, would that mean that the diets would be given to maybe like the hospital cooks and then they would delegate it to the particular patient? Is that usually how it goes?
So if you're feeding somebody by mouth or orally, there are predetermined diets already in place. So if somebody just requires a regular diet, that would be pretty standard. If somebody, say, requires a low potassium or a renal diet, something where your kidneys are impacted, that diet's already been predetermined for the foods that you'll need, say, less protein, less potassium. You're going to watch for your phosphorus. There are certain things that you're going to watch out for. So they've already predetermined what foods fit within that diet. And so there's different ones too, like say a surgical patient, there's ones that if you're at risk for a certain type of complication, you may be on a diet that has smaller, more frequent meals, that's higher in protein, that has like low sugar. So you'll look at different factors, and so there's predetermined diets for all of those things. So typically we'll just select one, or you select the one that's the priority. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And to add on to that, I'm just thinking about how you actually even got into this position. And I was curious to know what was your decision to actually become a dietitian? Yeah.
So it for me, it was a way of combining science. I loved kind of looking at biology and anatomy and taking courses like that. And also I'm a foodie. I love food. And it kind of was a way of combining the best of both worlds for me. Also too, like I've been surrounded by people that worked in healthcare. So my mom was a healthcare worker and she's always an inspiration to me. So it was a way of kind of helping people and combining things that I felt I was good at and that I cared about. So those are kind of the general reasons I became a dietitian, and food is probably number one.
Well, it's definitely a role that plays a direct. It's just as important as the medicine. What you eat is going to affect your body very much so, especially in patients that are in the hospital at those crucial times. So it's a very commendable
Yeah,
job.
absolutely. We often don't think about what we eat or how it nourishes us until something's not working, until it's not going well. And there's a lot to be said for you are what you eat in a way in terms of how it impacts you. And for patients that we're just trying to kind of, when you try to nourish somebody, I think that's something that maybe is a misconception about being a dietitian, is that some people will think that we're about putting people on diets, whereas we're more about nourishing people. And if we can do that for food, I have a food first approach where if you can get access to your proteins, your carbs, your fats, all those vitamins and minerals, all that good stuff through your food, that's how I like to try and help first. And then there's also added benefits, of course, and supplements and things that are necessary at times. And I'll use any tool that I have to try to help a patient recovering from cancer, or to nourish somebody, or to try to keep even like muscle mass on after a surgery or something like that. So I think people often just they eat their 3 meals a day and sometimes don't think about how the impact of food and how it actually keeps us feeling good and feeling well and doing well.
Yeah, and there's something that you pointed out in there was a lot of times we don't think about how it plays a role in our body. And I had a family member who actually went to the hospital and they had ended up getting an ileostomy bag, which for those who don't know, it's basically taking a part out of your intestinal tract, I guess you could say, and you're left with a bag at the side of your body. And when they were in the hospital and all that, I've never I was like being with this member, I never thought about how much food can impact and even just goes through your body. So we really relied on the help of dietitians to help us through, because I had no idea how it would help them out with that.
Absolutely. And you don't even think about how fast food can travel through your system as well,
Yes.
too. So your family member in particular with the ileostomy, it was the part of the small bowel before the large bowel that's coming to the surface, and that's where the bag is attached. And that if food hasn't reached your large bowel yet, that's actually where most of your food or water, I should say, is reabsorbed into your system. A couple other things, but that's the big role of your large bowel or your colon. So where that bag was for your family member was on the last part of the small intestine, which impacts how you reabsorb like some of your bile salts, which impacts like fat digestion. It looks at like vitamin B12. You're looking at things that if it's coming out the bag before the colon, you're looking at possible dehydration. There's things, and then there's like what you do when it's like immediately right after that type of surgery. There's a risk of the bowels really swollen. And so you kind of have to have lower fiber foods to avoid a blockage for about a couple months after a surgery like that. So there's different things, and it's sometimes the timing of what like your family member or a patient is going through. It's like what's leading up to that event or medical condition that happened, like what immediately you can do, and then long-term what you can do. So like sometimes the stage of what the person is going through can really impact what foods they need and what things they should eat and what complications you can run into. So I always believe as a dietitian, if I can explain the why to you of what's important about what's impacted from your digestive tract, what's like, you know, what's necessary to know, if you understand the why of what's happening to your body, and then I think the solutions or like the practical outcomes, like the day-to-day things that say maybe you need more protein or you need less potassium, or then it makes more sense. And then patients or the person is more likely to kind of be on board and kind of be like, okay, this is why this is important. This is why I need to do this. And this is how you can do it, and kind of making it easier. So I kind of forgot your original question there, but if you ever want to talk about that.
I don't think it really was a question. It's just from what you had said, it was more so just how you'd mentioned that you don't think about how, like, once you eat something, you think about how it's in front of you, and sometimes not necessarily how it impacts your body directly. I know we think about the most easiest metric. I know even for me, it's just like, will I gain weight or not? But it's so much harder to connect if I eat more broccoli or if I eat more of these types of vegetables, that this will make me feel better, because it's a lot of times not like a direct instantly an hour later, but you know, as you continue with the healthy lifestyle. And I think that that's why it's so important as well that we have dietitians who are reputable, who can help guide individuals through these processes, because intuitive eating isn't always intuitive for many people.
No, and I think you've said it just in that one sentence. Is I think once you start learning to, or get used to, or recognize, maybe it's even recognition of what fullness feels like, or what something feels like, and you kind of get a better sense of that, then intuitive eating is a lot easier to do. And then you kind of know why, like that. But there's a lot of other factors that kind of impact it, like eating. If you're bored, if you're stressed, stress is a huge one. If you don't sleep well, I don't know about you, but I'm always hungrier the next day, and I'm craving foods that have sugar. You know, I'm just trying to get those types of foods into. So there's a lot that kind of impacts, like, yeah, how you eat to how you feel. And I think for the patients I see on a daily basis, like, they're not feeling well. So, you know, try topping, you're in so much pain, or something's coming out one end or another, and how do you convince somebody that eating is a good thing to do?
And with a lot of the things, like you had mentioned, that you start with the why to help with the patient, but as someone who is the professional that people look to, food nutrition is really complicated, and it seems like there's always these studies coming out that says one thing, and then later on it's conflicting with another thing. So how do you go and find what's reputable or figure out what works best for a patient?
So I think it's always taking everything first with a grain of salt. You have to look at what the source is and what the quality of the source is. So we look at a lot of journal articles, and it's where did the journal article come from? So for example, some journal articles are more reputable than others. And they'll kind of put different types of studies or quality of studies out there. So for example, there may be something called a randomized control trial, where everything's tightly controlled, and those tend to be the studies that are the most accurate. Those studies tend to happen more sometimes in the ICU setting. And I find outside of the ICU, it becomes a bit more of a challenge because nutrition becomes a little bit more of a gray area. So you do your best to interpret the quality of the study. You look at the sample size, like how many people. So a study will carry more weight if, say, 1,000 people have participated in the study versus 20. So you kind of look at that, like the different impacts and things that might introduce like biases or whatnot. So, and then also too, like for people that look on the internet and try to find something, it's looking at, check out people's sources, because sometimes they'll quote something, they'll list all these references and all these sources, but is the referencing article actually matching up with what the person's trying to say, or they used the article for a quote? So I think sometimes also too, back to my earlier statement of journal articles, the more articles that you have that support the kind of the belief or the outcome, more likely you can probably try to believe in some of those things, and you can relay that information to your patients. But it's always an evolving and a changing area, and I think that's probably what's exciting about it. Sometimes we'll learn, like there's a lot of research going into the microbiome these days, and there's certain conditions, and the microbiome is more like your gut health, so to speak. Okay. And there's a lot of interest in people that have IBS, people with like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. There's different conditions that are really impacted by digestive health, or sometimes if you haven't even been diagnosed with something. But I posted something on Instagram today, and it's like, how do you know you have good digestion? And my answer was, when you don't have to think about it. So good digestion is sometimes you have to kind of listen to your patients and what they're saying about that. Look at kind of the research that's out there, and kind of be honest about that it's not black or white. So I'll tell people, this is what currently the research is saying. This is like maybe a growing area of research. This is something that we could try. It's kind of, if I use that microbiome example, so people are really, when you eat food, is like kind of recognizing how you feel. A lot of people will recognize how they don't feel, right? How like if you eat a certain type of fiber, we think of fiber in terms of like insoluble and soluble, and how that maybe might impact our good gut bacteria. So there's a lot of talk about probiotics and whatnot, and we're always like, more fiber, mm-hmm. But sometimes depending on what the bacteria you have in your gut is, which is determined by a lot of things, not all fiber is tolerated by every individual. And so sometimes that's why it's hard to say. I'm like, you can kind of give those statements that on the whole, eating fiber is a really good thing, but you might be the person that doesn't tolerate legumes very well, or you don't tolerate something else very well. And it's kind of like learning that, well, where do you find other sources of it or whatnot? And kind of, I think sometimes when you maybe just try to explain the why of it's happening and like what the research is saying, then it kind of makes it easier that people are more accepting of like, there's a bit of trial and error, there's a bit of a process. And I think that makes it a bit more comfortable, like for people, and kind of getting to the bottom of it. I think just reassuring people that you'll kind of look at it, like you'll use the best science that's out there, but it's an evolving area that sometimes what you've said, like, doesn't always apply anymore. Like I think we used to always say, try to go high fiber with irritable bowel syndrome. There's sometimes that just doesn't work. And so the research is kind of what you want to try to have certain types of fibers and then see if you tolerate those fibers. And so it's like an area, I'm kind of going in a circle, trying to find the best way to explain it. But I think it's a bit of an evolution, and like there's things that can always like change slightly. So kind of keeping that in mind too, like the research is like the best information that you have at the time, and then that's your best to answer to go with that. But if you find like studies that come along and there's more and more studies that are supporting maybe a different idea, then that's something that I think we need to be open to as like dietitians and healthcare professionals, that like the research can evolve and change.
I find that really interesting, and I like to hear that, it sounds like you're being very honest with the patients, again, going with the why, and it doesn't seem as though it's 100% establishing like this food is bad. It's really going based on the individual patient's needs. And one of the things that you had mentioned a few times was the irritable bowel syndrome, and it just made me think about, do dietitians have, because there's so much nutrition, I could imagine, for someone who's an athlete would need to have a different diet than, again, maybe a cancer patient. So does that mean that dietitians have different specialties in what they do, or like how does that work?
Absolutely. And I would, if there's something that is happening to you and you want to see a dietitian, try to find one that is specialized in that area. So if you think of it even in terms of doctors, for example, you have your family doctor, your GP, who's like a general practitioner. So you know a little bit about everything, but not a lot about a specialty. And so sometimes I think that can be the trouble, is that somebody might give you general advice or kind of what you've read out of a textbook or what you've read out of journal articles and relay that information to you. But if you find someone who's specialized in a certain area, they're more up to date on the latest research, like what's actually happening, what's coming down the pipe. You've had more practical experience with patients as to what they're going through, what they're telling you, and you've kind of tried out different things to see what works best for people. And so you kind of combine, you just have a little bit more of I think you're able to kind of talk about the research and explain the why. I kind of hammer home that point of the why, but then you're also able to give like practical day-to-day solutions, and people really want that. You don't want to go to a class and have it be something, a nutrition class, and have it be something generic that you can read off the internet. There's so much information that's on the internet these days, so you need to kind of help people with the questions that they're really having about nutrition. So for example, like there's another dietitian named Shelley Case, who's, I think, a nutrition expert and a specialist in celiac disease. And she has years of experience where she knows the research. She works with the top professionals that have done a lot of research in celiac disease. She's worked with patients. She's written books, and if it kind of goes into the day-to-day and the why of everything. So you even know, not just like, okay, avoid gluten, but what are the nourishing grains that you can add to your diet? Like, how should you eat? Like, what are the things that can be questionable about what you're eating? And kind of looking to the interpreting the science for you, but doing it in a relatable way that anybody can understand. So I think that's kind of something that I like to do as well, is try to like be like, okay, here's the research, but like, how do I make that something that's relatable? Like, and how do you know what to eat when you have a busy family? How do you know what to eat when you're feeling really well or you're feeling unwell? Like, it's kind of making it something that's practical. So it's kind of more of a customized like approach, and kind of knowing that what's happening. And then also too, kind of knowing that often people they're going through one thing that's like the bigger priority that they need help with, but they often sometimes have multiple other things that also have nutrition implications or problems, and you kind of have to help support that as well too.
And I could imagine that being able to communicate with anyone that you're working with would be an important skill. Would that be arguably maybe the most important, or is there some other skills that are also important as being a dietitian?
I think that's definitely one of them. I think it's something that you always want to feel heard. Like, you want to feel that the person is understanding of what you are saying to them. So I think communication is key. We're in a healthcare profession, so I think it's something that's essential to our jobs for sure. I think as a dietitian as well, I think it's really important to think of yourself as a critical thinker or as a problem solver. Like, you need to know the latest in research, but what do you do if you have slightly conflicting studies? how do you relate that to what the food trends are out there and what the current diets are out there? How do you combine it all together and kind of present that to the patient in a way that is, interesting, practical for the patient? And I think you just really need to love food. I think you have to appreciate it and kind of know this, what's in foods to kind of that make them nourishing, that can help a patient overall. So I'd probably say a bit of a problem solving, good communication skills, and a love of food.
Well, just the thought of actually, it's hard enough to cater my own diet to myself when I'm the one in my own body, let alone I couldn't imagine doing it for someone else. So I could imagine that's a lot of critical thinking right there. And as well, to keep on top of we say food trends, but as well, different people have different household ethnic backgrounds. So they maybe want to incorporate, a European diet would be something that's different than something of a Japanese diet or something like that.
Absolutely, and that comes into play for everything. So when I give out handouts or nutrition handouts to my patients, I like to talk to them about what they like to eat, what they mostly eat at home as well too. And it's going to be different because if foods in terms of how you prepare them and how you like to eat them, just it kind of gives a better picture of everything. So absolutely, culture is huge. I grew up in a multicultural home myself, and so it was very much a combination of all sorts of foods. So I think I got the best of both worlds there, but it's delicious in my house.
I could imagine. And I think that's a good segue because, a lot of time you've been talking about you got to love food to be a dietitian. And I know that in addition, we've been talking as a dietitian, but I know that you also have a website or blog called NaturallyNu. And I wanted to know what inspired you to get started, and maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So NaturallyNu it's a blog that's designed for gluten-free foodies. So I was diagnosed with celiac disease myself about 5 or 6 years ago. And, I had the background knowledge about what foods I should eat. I knew that knowledge and I had that knowledge. So it made things easier for me in some ways. But I also loved going out to restaurants. I loved being a foodie and trying foods from everywhere and just trying all food in general. So when I didn't have quite that same ability anymore, I had to go back to the kitchen, and I had to I knew how to cook, but it kind of took my cooking to a whole nother level. And even learning gluten-free baking it's different. You don't realize what gluten is, but you don't realize its elasticity and how it affects your ability to bake foods. And so it's kind of learning a new way of cooking in some ways. And so NaturallyNu was kind of born out of that for wanting to kind of show people how to eat gluten-free, for wanting to kind of dispel some myths out there that gluten-free food tastes bad, or, well, this tastes good for gluten-free. I just wanted to eat food that just tastes good because it's good. And those are kind of the recipes that I create or I want to create. And those are the products out there that I want to share, is food products that actually work really well, that are also nourishing at the same time. Because that was the other thing that I noticed out there. There's a lot of gluten-free products out there, but some of them are fantastic. And, it's good to have a repertoire of those for sure. But there's also a lot of products out there that are kind of high in sugar and low in fiber and aren't the most nourishing. And while all foods can fit, I definitely believe that. I kind of wanted to just highlight the ones that I thought could be the most nourishing, or the ones that just simply don't work. Kind of talk about some of those things. At the time, and I also too, I do want to be known as an expert in celiac disease as a dietitian. I do have that background. It's kind of funny how NaturallyNu kind of became, or it feels like a bit of a community that I found on Instagram a little bit as well. So it kind of has evolved over the past couple of years, I would say, but my focus is still on creating recipes and kind of myth busting and kind of talking about what it's like to be a celiac, what you kind of need to, how you need to nourish yourself, and kind of presenting some of that latest research that I've talked about before. And also too, a side thing that kind of came out of NaturallyNu was food photography. And I found that by highlighting a certain gluten-free brands and kind of showing people like how good it can look and how good it can taste, that's kind of led to companies contacting me as well. So it's evolving a bit, but it's kind of a website for the gluten-free foodie, that's for sure.
Well, I must say I've looked at the images you have, the photography, and honestly, like it makes everything look so good. And I gotta check these recipes out because, again, this time, my boyfriend's father, he's celiac, so he's been living with that as long as I've known my boyfriend. So to have more recipes up their alley, I look forward to making some of these. Some of these look so good.
Oh, absolutely. Please try them. Yeah, I'm always happy to answer any questions related to that for sure.
Well, with one of the things I was curious about is that when you were talking about with some of these items, you know, they might not be as nourishing or nutritionally dense, even though it says gluten-free. I think a lot of companies, unfortunately, do just label it just because they get to throw the label on, even though it's not really making it up for it in the other things. So I was curious when you were trying to make a dish for maybe a celiac dish or even just a healthy dish in general. I know, again, it would be based off the patient, but what are the things that you look for when you want to start making something that's, let's say, nourishing?
So I kind of look at the ingredients, and I always try to start with whole foods if I can. Just that way you get kind of the maximum nutrition out of those foods. And so kind of looking at things that have whole grains or good quality lean proteins, lots of fruits and vegetables, kind of having a bit more of a plant-based approach. And those are the things that I really try to base it off of. And so I tend to kind of gravitate towards those foods naturally a little bit. I do have a bit of an obsession with kind of adding more fiber into my diet. So that's something that's super important to me as well. So I look for a lot of different sources, whether that's like legumes or nuts and seeds, more vegetables, that sort of thing. But also too, we're all busy for different reasons. And I like being in the kitchen, but I don't want to spend my whole day in the kitchen. So the other thing that I focus on is kind of trying to be mindful of time and how easy it is, because I know I'm distractible at times. So I kind of want there to kind of be less ingredients, like kind of keep it simple, keep it under 30 minutes if I can, or at least keep the prep time down if something has to bake. I don't want my involvement to like require a lot of time to do it. So if it's something that I can like prep in 15 minutes and toss in the oven, then that's fantastic. So sometimes an example of like that is like even sheet pan meals or dinners like that will be like super easy for just coming home from work, and say you're not inspired, you're like, what's for dinner? That's like how many times do we like come home and you're like, oh, what do I have in my fridge? What am I going to eat? You know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a way of looking at all those things. So kind of looking at your ingredients first, like, so I try to use common ingredients if I can, and then like some recipes for sure, like, you know, whether it's based on a recipe from a different culture or whatnot, we always want to try new things. So maybe my pantry might have a few more sauces and or a few more different ingredients than others, but kind of just trying to keep it simple for people, fast for people, because I think that's what I think that's what I like myself as well. And so I think that helps. I think all of that combined all together, that kind of helps.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. Sheet pan meals are the best. Especially, it's amazing how just baking off vegetables just makes them taste so much better. And it's really a low fuss, and it makes it taste 100 times better than just boiling it on the stove.
Absolutely. And I always think like sometimes too, like my mom was a working mom, and sometimes it would be like frozen vegetables when I was younger. I'm like, oh, this is gross. You know, I don't like it, but kind of learning how you can flavor your food, or kind of the way that you prepare it. And you probably know more about this area than I do, but just how that enhances everything. And so brings out the flavor. And sometimes the flavor of foods does come out more with a little bit of cooking, even some nutrients sometimes, like tomatoes, for example, you'll get more nutrition out of the tomato when it's cooked. That's not always the case, but
Right.
you know, I think, yeah, you know, no fuss, but healthy. But that at the same time, I love my dessert. I'm like, that will never go away.
Being someone who's been navigating with this gluten-free lifestyle, have you found that it's been easier to manage or as the years, because I know that there's way more options available. Has it become easier for you?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I think it depends what stage of celiac disease that you're in and your age when you're diagnosed and everything. Well, kind of getting diagnosed when you're older, it takes longer for your gut to heal. So sometimes people will be like, I'm eating gluten-free, but I'm still getting symptoms. And sometimes there's trace amounts of gluten that have gotten in there and that's why you're sick again. But it can take like 6 to 18 months for your gut to truly heal and for
Wow.
you to be able to absorb your food properly again. So it took me a long time. And for example, even oats, like there's recommendations and there's varying evidence out there about whether you should have like ever have oats, but most of the organizations around the world feel that oats is safe after a certain period of time, like after that, like say a 6-month period or something like that, and then kind of gradually reintroducing some of those foods. So yeah, absolutely. Like I feel better now all the time because the only time that gluten sneaks into my diet is through cross contamination. And I think that's maybe the one thing that people don't really know or understand. They'll see gluten free and kind of be like, oh, okay, so well this food doesn't have any gluten. The label, they can even get good at label reading or on the menu and it says gluten free. But it all depends on preparation in the kitchen. Like, does the same utensil get used that's touched something that's had gluten on the manufacturing line? Did they box up pasta with gluten right before the gluten-free pasta? You know, just different examples. So there's different places of contact where that cross-contamination can come into play. And I think that's what, you know, gets me now sometimes is that, or my boyfriend, he still has gluten. And so if the toaster, like if some crumbs get in there, there's times where if there's something just on the counter, most of the time we're very careful and we're very clean, but it still gets to every now and again. In terms of the food products that are out there, I think it's fantastic. Gluten-free from when I first started as a dietitian to where things are now is like night and day. Like finally there's delicious gluten-free bread out there that you don't have to toast. And
Wow.
even 5 years ago or 10 years ago, you couldn't say that. And that same bread now has like fiber and good amounts of protein and is like actually good quality bread. So there are actually a lot of good quality products out there, you know, and I think it's really helped, whether it was the gluten-free trend or people that have sensitivities, or whether there's different diets like for like IBS or IBD, like different conditions like that, where you do even temporarily limit your gluten intake. That's led to the market kind of exploding. And I think it's probably maybe at its like peak, but gluten-free food isn't going away. And so the amount of products that are out there isn't going to go away either. And so I think it's really helpful. And so I have to say, like when somebody puts a symbol that says gluten-free or just even writes the words gluten-free on there, it just makes my shopping experience so much easier. Then I can like venture out and try new products or different brands and kind of just, you know, you want to have fun with your food too. It should be enjoyable. I know I talk about health a lot, but I'm like, food needs to, for me, and I'm sure for you, it like needs to taste good. And so if I can like pick something off the shelf that like says it's easily gluten-free and then I can make a meal out of it, then that's fantastic. So yeah, there's a lot of gluten-free products out there. It's a huge, I'm grateful to any company that goes through the certification process, because it means a lot to me as a celiac. I know it means to a lot of people that do have celiac disease. It just makes our lives so much easier.
It's fascinating how for some individuals, just getting those trace amounts can affect your body. And even like it's mind blowing to me that your bodies can be so in tune and sensitive to something. It's just pretty amazing.
Yeah, I know, absolutely, right? And so, for example, for somebody with celiac disease, think of a slice of bread and 1/60th, that small of an amount can be enough to set off your symptoms. I don't experience what I first experienced like prior to my diagnosis, but I know if there's a trace in there, I can feel it. And it usually for me, it's like clockwork within 2 hours that it would happen. And so, and I kind of know what I'm in for like the next 24 to 48 hours, like I know what's going to happen. And so it can be, yeah, that small of amount. And like, so for even people that say you just have a sensitivity or it's just a food that bothers you, like maybe you don't get the same malabsorption, but a lot of the other symptoms that you feel, the digestive symptoms, are the same, and not that uncomfortableness, the pain, like the things that you can feel. And no one person's experience is the same as another's. So I think it's, yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, and again, it's just reminisces on this, like the idea. Again, my boyfriend's father, he was just eating a regular piece of chewing gum, and he thought nothing of it, and then all of a sudden, his symptoms were crazy, and he's like, I
Yeah,
didn't eat anything with gluten, and he's like, the only thing I literally ate within the past whatever span was a piece of gum, and he's like, oh my gosh, I got it from the gum. Like, why is there gluten even remotely near my gum?
yeah, it's so funny because there's actually only a couple of brands that are certified gluten-free in terms of gum, and you don't think about those things, right? You're just like, oh, it's a piece of gum, how can that affect me? But it can. And so I think it's interesting, like even gum for people. I've brought up irritable bowel syndrome for some reason a lot in this talk today, but there's even certain types of gum that have sugar alcohols that can set off symptoms for people that have that type of condition. So it's kind of funny that we don't really always think about those things, but yeah, it definitely happens.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that as the food industry continues to grow in the manufacturing side, I just really hope that the labeling gets more gets more strenuous and like really tells everything, because I think that especially for people with food allergies, with it's so important that it's not just a matter of being transparent for your customers, but just it's for their health at the end of the day. It's not a matter of them just watching their weight or their calories. If there's something that's in there that could really seriously affect them.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. And so even when companies list like the top 8 allergens, if they're free of those, I'm like, all of those sorts of things are helpful because it does impact health and it does impact your enjoyment of of the food. If it's something that you're going to get sick off of later, I'm like, okay, not gonna try that again.
For sure. And because we're getting close to the end of our chat, I wanted to make sure that I just covered a few more questions that I didn't want to miss, with one of them being, I always like to ask our guests is there any advice that you would want to give to a student or a new graduate who wants to become a dietitian?
I'd say go for it. I think if you have an interest in food, knowledge about food, how the human body works, if you're curious about how what you eat, how that is impacted by your body, or just how different medical conditions impact how you tolerate your food. If you're interested in any of those things, then this is like a great job for you. There are dietitians that work in many areas. Like I work in the hospital, but you could work in population or in public health and kind of impact more policy if you're interested in that. There's a lot these days on being a fellow podcaster or being an influencer, or you have a lot of reach on social media right now where you can impact a lot of people in a positive way and help people with different things that are important to you. So kind of there isn't really like a script in terms of what you can do. When you're working as a dietitian, you could work in different areas of nutrition in terms of like even preventative health, like how do you prevent different chronic conditions, or just how do you even eat well? I think people are fascinated with how can I nourish my body to the best of its ability. So if any of those things are like interesting to you, like network, get out there, talk to other people in the field, other people in different areas, volunteer, see what area that you like. Because, is it that area where you're more preventative nutrition and kind of just nourishing and healing well? Or do you want to work with patients that don't have everything that works like clockwork, where there are a lot of like nutrition problems and a lot of nutrition challenges, and kind of just thinking of just even looking at the patient and kind of being able to tell if there's a deficiency there and how you can kind of help with that. So be curious, get out there, try new things. As for like new grads, what would I tell them? What would I tell them? That's
like questions for you.
Yeah, what would I tell them? That is a very, very good question. I just say that, focus on what you're passionate about. I know that for me, the area that I work in is something that I am passionate about. Digestive health, gut health, whatever you want to call it, is something that intrigues me and kind of inspires me to keep going, because then you'll want to look at the research, you'll want to kind of know more about it and just be relatable, like really get to know something, kind of be as much of a specialist in that area that you're passionate about as you can, because people do want to talk to a nutrition expert. You have a lot of things to like offer to people, but you need to make sure you do it in a relatable way. Like, you don't want to be a Wikipedia page, like people can read online. You need to make it really relatable to people. And how do you communicate that well to people? So just kind of see what other people that are inspiring to you, like you can reach out to them, have a conversation. And I think people will be more than happy to talk to you, other fellow dietitians or other fellow health professionals, and just really see what kind of inspires you. Because I think if you're inspired and if you're passionate about what you do, then there's a lot, like the sky's the limit.
For sure. And I really suggest that people also, as you said, if you want, reach out to dietitians, but there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of good podcasts out there where there's dietitians talking with dietitians who are talking about their specialties and all that. And you could probably get so much knowledge just out of listening to those conversations as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, listen to a lot of different podcasts, and even just people that have complementary professions, like listen to them as well. See what you really like. There's so much information out there, but on podcasts, on blogs, on different social media platforms, there is like almost too much information out there. There's like a wealth of information out there. So sure. Kind of just don't be afraid to go and try and ask and do. And I think those are all good things.
Well, if those who are listening, if they want to know more about a dietitian who's doing things related to celiac, you're going to have to check out Jen's Instagram as well as her website, NaturallyNu, which I'll put in the show notes, but that's going to be your go-to for one of those things.
I hope so. That'd be great. That'd be fantastic.
So that's actually a good place just to finish this off and ask, if people want to find or connect with you, where can we find you?
So you can either find me on Instagram at naturally.nu, or you can find me at my website at naturallynu.com. And there are ways, there's a contact page where you can reach me, just email or message me, and I'll get back to you. I'm always happy to have a conversation.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jen, for coming on the show. This was a really interesting conversation, and it just reminds me the importance of food at no matter what stage. If you're healthy or if you're, coming out of the hospital, we need food to nourish us no matter what stage. So thanks for reminding me that and sharing all this really good knowledge about what you do. So thanks.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. And hopefully it was presented in a way that's easy and fun. So thank you for having me.
That was episode 26 of the FoodGrads podcast. All the notes of this podcast can be found on the FoodGrads blog or by clicking the Student and Grads tab on the homepage. There you can find any notes to past or future episodes. Do you know anyone you would like me to interview on the show? Perhaps yourself? Or maybe there's a specific career that you want to learn more about. Well, if that's the case, then reach out to me and let me know on any of the FoodGrads social media platforms or at my email, veronica@foodgrads.com. Hope to hear from you. Part of my mispronunciation of the word ileostomy in the episode, you would think I would know how to say it properly, considering the family member with the condition is my mother. It was a bit of a challenge learning how to cook for her condition, but we did end up figuring it out. And with everything that had happened, I really stress it. It becomes so easy to forget how important it is to think about how food reacts to your body when you don't have any medical conditions such as myself. And you realize that food really does affect your body, and it's important to consider what you consume. So, my little PSA or my reminder of the day is to make sure to keep up with your yearly physicals and stay in touch with your doctor. You want to know what's going on, especially when it involves your health. That's it for this week's episode. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and I will see you next time.